Hello, it's Talk Gnosis. I'm Deacon Jon. I'm joined today by Saskia Vogel, translator of The Ways of Paradise by Peter Cornell, one of the most unique books I have ever read. I was actually saying off air, I don't know how to talk about this book. I hope that you will all read it right away. I'm already telling you, I'm going to put a link in the show notes to an excerpt from the book that was in the Paris review so that you can read it. You will be entranced. You will go out. You will buy copies for yourself and everybody that you know. So, Saskia, thanks so much for coming on. I'm really happy that you're able to do this and really excited to talk about this book and your work on it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So, a question that's much harder to answer than people might think, which is, what is the ways of paradise? And maybe the second part of that question, which is a little bit easier, but who was Peter Cornell?
Oh, well, Peter Cornell was an art historian in Sweden, and he wrote this slim novel in the 80s, and it became something of a cult book. And the brilliant people at Fitzcarraldo, together with a family friend who was acting as his agent, brought the attention, they it ended up at Fitzcarraldo, and they take such good risks with their publishing and have such extraordinary taste that it was like, I don't know, it's kind of a match made in heaven.
Yeah. And how did you get involved with this project?
That's a really good question. I mean, I feel like my whole translation career has been kind of faded in a really nice way. Um, I had actually Jacques at Fitzcarraldo. We'd known each other through sort of the London through literature in London since just before I think he started the White Reviews together with Ben Eastham. So we've sort of had a literary dialogue ongoing for a long time, and I think we wanted to work together for a very long time. And I can't remember at this moment if I was already working on one of Bassem Karam's books for Fitzcarraldo when Jacques emailed me about The Ways of Paradise, but it was kind of in the mix there. Like the book had come to his attention. It seemed like something for him. There was a French translation which he could read. And I don't know. It's it's magic how these things happen. Like it with translation and with literature in general, it always surprises me that anything happens because there's so many moments of serendipity, interest, desire, opportunity that have to align for something to work, you know?
Yeah. Can you try to tell us what this book is? Because of course, it just even in format, it is incredibly unique.
Yeah, I mean, it's a book full of footnotes. The conceit is that, I mean, it looks and acts like nonfiction. And I'm just looking at other Fitzcarraldo books. I think it's white. It's white. I mean, it's white on its cover, which I think is the nonfiction side of Fitzcarraldo, and the blue books are the fiction. But the book is supposed to be a novel, so it sits in this strange space where there's a sort of fictional conceit around these footnotes that all refer back to texts that circle the idea of paradise, from sort of historical texts to like 20th century art history and like the surrealists and literature and a little bit of psychoanalysis. But the conceit is that there was this. You know what? Do you want me to read the introduction?
Please.
The preface will tell it to you better than me. Um, so this is the setup for the book. The author of this text was a familiar figure at the National Library of Sweden in Stockholm's Humlegården. Almost every day for more than 3 decades, he could be spotted in the serene reading room, absorbed in his studies, in reverie. It was said that he was occupied with an uncommonly comprehensive project, a work that, as he once disclosed in confidence, would reveal a chain of connections until then overlooked. However, even after the thorough investigations following his death, the work in question has yet to be located. Among his effects is a sheaf of papers on which is written "The Ways of Paradise" notes, which is to say, all that seems to remain of his great work is its critical apparatus. The found manuscript is typewritten on white A4 paper. It consists of 122 loose sheets collected in said sheaf. Neither the pages nor the notes are numbered. In this edition, I have, however, numbered the footnotes following their order in the manuscript. The extent to which this order was finalized, we cannot be sure. Other combinations cannot be ruled out, nor can we be sure that this manuscript contains the complete critical apparatus to the ways of paradise, or if this represents but a small part. Certain graphic figures were included in the manuscript. Other illustrations, notably reproductions of various artworks named in the text, I have appended myself. As the author's sole remaining friend and student, all that is left for me to do is publish these notes in the hope that they will provide a glimpse of the lost work's contours. And this preface is signed by the author Peter Cornell, Stockholm, June 1987.
Yes.
So I think it's a wonderful conceit that like shifts the terms of reality, I think, because we're diving into factual footnotes, or footnotes based on research, but we're sitting in that juicy space and reality and irreality, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And I have a confession to make, which is what you just read is also the intro to the selection that was published in the Paris Review. So I read that, and then of course I read those footnotes, and I'm not always the smartest person. And I'm like, wow, I can't believe this text is still lost. It's the Sweden has great public archives. Surely it can be dug out. Maybe I can go to the archive website and see if I can find a copy because, I love old, strange esoteric texts, and these footnotes definitely make it sound like something. And then I caught on. So that said, and I think you did communicate this where the conceit is about circles around a fictional text, as you said. The footnotes draw on a wide range of human knowledge. Like that's all actually in there. Do you consider this an esoteric or mystical text?
I mean, I kind of feel like the practice of translation as well is like an esoteric kind of practice. I mean, I do. I mean, I think there's I mean, the text, the way that because I was, when I started translating it, I was like, gosh, how am I going to relate to this? I mean, I like the strands of thinking that Cornell kind of refers to and the whole book centers around this idea of paradise, but specifically like the yearning for paradise. And I think that space of yearning, yeah, I mean, there's something sort of like is isn't isn't that sort of gray space or that shadow space, like a space that we want to go to when we think about occult or esoteric practices or thinking, to kind of enter into that in between.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really glad that you brought up sort of the esotericism, mysticism that's involved in the actual art of translation. So I'm in Montreal. One of the largest cash prizes in the world for poetry is Canada's Griffin Award. And some people are surprised to discover that the translations are eligible to win. They've won in the past, and the prize doesn't go to the quote unquote original author, but to the translator. And some people find this shocking because they think that translators are human dictionaries, right? Who just swap a word with its corresponding term in another language. Can you tell us more about like the true work of a translator and especially what it was like translating this and maybe some of the process since it is such a unique tome?
Sure. But hold on. They don't split the prize at all. It's just to the translator?
As far as I understand, yes.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
I mean, author should get some too. But that's really nice to have that kind of mega acknowledgement. I mean, it's really interesting, especially with like the advent of AI, which I like to play around with because I want to know what everybody's talking about and what it means for the strand of my profession. Like I also work as a writer. I'm a novelist. I wrote a novel called Permission that came out in 2019, and then last year I relaunched a magazine called The Erotic Review, um, which is not the escort website from the States, but an art and literary publication from the UK that was launched about 30 years ago in its first iteration. So this idea of working with text and kind of like it's very holistic for me. And specifically, what what I didn't know that I would love so much about translation. I mean, I suppose I came to language and story because when I went to high school in Sweden, there were so many things in flux, but the one thing that I felt like I could just keep with me, no matter the circumstances of my life, was language. So it's always been this sort of anchor point for me, or at least since the 90s, it came into sharp focus in that way. And in terms of translating, like I often feel kind of like with writing that the best translations and the most pleasurable active translation, I guess, is when I feel like I can just be a conduit for the text. And I wish I had maybe more of a theoretical background or academic kind of rhetoric around what I'm going to tell you, but for me it's very physical, and it's just deep into like sensory being. I really just like to try to access the feeling of the text. I mean, I suppose translators can approach the text in different ways. For example, you could place constraints on yourself. You could choose to translate a text without ever using the word and that would be a choice, and it would be a legitimate choice. It would be experimental, but it's as good a choice as any. And you might want to prioritize, say, historical accuracy or historical voice for a certain text, but I don't know. I feel like even as I do throughout all the texts that I translate, which tend to be usually contemporary fiction, um, I start with how does it feel and how do I impart this feeling? It was that sort of wild sense that I could convey a feeling or be a conduit for sort of like unleashing of imagery and sensation in another person through a text in translation was kind of the wild moment that made me really want to do this job and think that I could do it, because that physical sensation of like being like feeling this feeling and knowing which words I could use to like conjure it in someone else in English, that was pretty wild. Yeah. And then with this text, what's interesting, I had to really find a way into it, because of course the footnotes are academic. They're pretty funny. Like, there are moments that are kind of hilarious, and it often has to do with like order or like a slight wryness of tone. But it's really subtle. Most of it is just sort of footnotes, as you'd expect. But like one of my favorite books is House of Leaves, the Mark Z. Danielewski, which is a book that also has a really meaningful set of footnotes. And so I know the pleasure of the footnote, and in this one, I think it was just a manner of kind of like holding a very varied academic voice, because there are also a lot of quotations and excerpts from like archaic texts. Um, and just kind of making sure the reading experience was smooth. It was weirdly, I wouldn't say this was challenging in terms of language, but it was challenging in terms of tone, and really challenging in terms of like how to handle error, because I think the conceit that this is supposed to be, that this is a lost manuscript, but it's an imaginary lost manuscript. Peter was like, yeah, the researcher is a little sloppy. He doesn't cite things properly, and so because it's in the sort of white covered section of Fitzcarraldo, and with the rigor of like Anglo-Saxon publishing norms around citations and stuff, it was a whole thing.
Absolutely. Um, well, I think people are picking up that you did an amazing job, and that wryness, that humor, it is there. I saw it, I appreciated it, and I think that you got that across in that sort of delicate way, right? Um, did you research it's basically an entire, if you read every work that's referenced in Ways of Paradise, right, you would basically be doing an entire 4-year degree. But did you do a lot of research? Did you dive into the works that are referenced? Did you read them? Did you engage with them? Because it really is a range, right? We have some of the basically what people think of, some people think of as the canonical works of the West, right, are in there. But then you also have the forgotten psychics who are talking to Martians. So it really is a dizzying array. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I like to keep a file. I mean, often for practical reasons, I try to always like screenshot or have the quotes that appear in the text from external sources, the quotes that exist in English. I usually just keep a file because, oh, just for the very boring reason that like people will ask for them and then I have to go look for them again. So, and because I'm seeking out quotation, because like what do I do? Let's see. Let's take a step back. I tended with this text to look to see if there were already existing translations because I don't know, maybe it's because I'm a translator. Um, I am like, I don't want to just translate these. I want to see, I want to bring somebody else's voice into this as well because I think that's, I don't know, it seems correct if there's an existing translation. But, you know, a lot of these texts are really hard to find. And I would say that the sort of like conditions of labor around translation are such that like this is my job. I'm a freelance literary translator. You know, it pays what it pays. So this vision of a translator being able to like dedicate themselves to a text in you know 4 years would be amazing to like spend reading all these texts, but just economically that's not how literary production of this kind of thing works. So, but I did read into a lot of stuff, uh, just to get a sense of voice and to get a sense of context. And the funny thing is, I think this happens a lot with translations. They'll start eking their way out into my world. So, like, you know, I really live with the text, and there's some. I mean, I think I don't know. There's some sort of energetic thing where, like, I'm so consumed by these thought processes in the text, and they inevitably find mirrors in the world around me. And you know, you work on I work on this translation maybe over a period of a year or maybe more. Or maybe it's like on my schedule for over a year, and then there's maybe a year of various types of working on it. So I really live with it for a very long time. Like I've had a lot of chances to think about the sex of Paris, the little island. You know, like those images of like Notre Dame and stuff have come up, of course, in the world for various reasons. And every time I see them, I think about the sort of passages in this book that reference them, and then the sort of whole text comes alive again in the mind. Does that make sense?
It does, it does. And Peter Cornell, unfortunately, recently passed. Did you work with him on the text, especially a text that is about hidden meanings? Like, did you call him up and be like, "What does this actually mean, Peter? What's up with this?" Or was there more separation there, or did he hold on to his secrets, or can you tell us about that?
Well, I mean, I wish I had that this is a question that could have such an extraordinary answer, but I didn't meaning wasn't kind of the main translation issue with this one. I think like the fact that all the gaps that Peter has placed in the text, they sit there really beautifully, you know. And I think that space, that like quivering open space where you can let your mind open, wasn't a translation problem. You know, it was just this. It was like a feature of the text, and I think that translates, I think, just really well without me having to do anything. It was kind of more about like we were in a lot of exchange over like, well, one, I would say like an Anglophone norm for citations would be like, you know, pick away. If you're going to do it differently, just pick away and stick with it. But how do we introduce randomness in this text without it seeming like our error? And that was very haphazard and actually created a lot of tension for me. It still creates a lot of tension for me. I mean, I'm a translator. I'm a trained researcher. I'm like, the footnotes are going to be like this. But then you're like, the so-called errors that Peter consciously put in the text are really wonderfully random. And for my personality, that was really stressful. Because like it needed to be randomized. And then of course as the translator, the thing that I'm like worse, that I'm like would love never to read is someone thinking that I've been sloppy, you know? Um, and then also we talked a lot about, I guess, standardization of certain words like makbenach that comes up. And, there were like there was this one book that's referenced a lot that exists in two translations. Either translation doesn't have the full text. They're both abridged or like partial bits, abridged bits of like a much longer work. And yeah, we spent a lot of time having those nitty-gritty conversations because but both books transliterated Makbanach differently. Is a thing.
So we live in the age of we talked about his unfortunate passing, but we live in the age of what they call the death of the author, right? There's an understanding that the meaning making happens through the act of reading, right? And I don't want to ask what this book is about, but it's something else that's sort of a recurring theme in the book that reviewers have pointed out is it is a kind of a maze, a labyrinth, right? You're sort of led into this labyrinth, and you get to sort of explore it. I guess I'm wondering, when you were in this labyrinth, like what were some of the things the work said to you? Like, what was the gnosis that you got at the center of the maze?
That's a really good question. I mean, I related to this book. Thing that I held, I think, close to me was the idea of loss, like this idea of like a constant reaching, um, constantly extending one's hand or one's mind into kind of the unknown space, but directed by, or the gesture is informed by, the sensation of a longing for something that has maybe a sensation but not a distinct shape. And that was just something I sat with a lot. Um, just kind of what does it mean to try to communicate something? And also like in a text like this, like I felt like this book spoke to me like very specifically. It doesn't feel like something that has gaps in it. It feels really whole because I think you bring up something really interesting. Another a writer I translate called Carolina Ronquist wrote this really wonderful essay where she really goes into how wonderful it is when you, the author, leave the privacy of your like private author world and you take your book into the public space, and only in its reading, only when someone else reads your book can the book be completed, because a book is completed in the act of reading, between the stuff that's on the page and the stuff that is happening in you and what you, the reader, are bringing to the book. And I just think this book is like kind of formally, in its form, brings that idea forward. And, so this idea of like completion goes away. I think a book like this, translating this book, added into an ongoing thought process I have about like, I don't know, being good with impermanence and just kind of sitting comfortably in the flux of things, as opposed to wanting to cling to some sort of foundation, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Well, even sort of staying on that theme, like I found myself right. I already mentioned sort of reading the selection from the text in the Paris review, and then being like, oh, I got to find this text, and then catching on. And then the second thing, even after I knew this, when I was reading the book, I would almost sometimes instinctually start to flip back to the text to be like, okay, that's a cool footnote. Okay, I just got to reread the corresponding, and then wait. wait a minute, there is no ways of paradise. There's no text I can come back to. I'm wondering, when you were working on it, did you kind of create the lost text in your mind, or were you trying not to do that so that what you do have sort of sings and you can focus on it, or can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, I think I'm like actively disinterested in the lost text.
Mm.
Um, I think the sort of the lost text is like walking around with the text in your head and like feeling it extend into the world. I just opened to page 80 where it's talking about Wilhelm Jensen's novel Gradiva. And I was just thinking, oh right, I checked Gradiva out on my little library app while I was in Greece and like walked around Greece thinking about Gradiva and thinking about therefore thinking about the ways of paradise and kind of getting deeper into like what yeah, like what this book is about and how like what its technology is, you know?
Yeah.
Like what is this book working towards in its form with its lostness? I mean, I like a mystery. I like a not knowing, almost as a practice of like willful ignorance, maybe. Like, of course, like once I started thinking about the text, the ultimate text that doesn't exist as a text that is about loss, that was kind of enough for me, I think.
Yeah.
There's a book I really like by Lena Wolf, translated by Frank Perry, called Bret Easton Ellis and the Underdogs. And it has this like donut hole structure. So there's this character called Alda that we only get to know through sort of stories from other people. So in my mind, it's kind of a spirograph. And so that's a little bit how this book works for me, that like I'm really excited by the sort of how the how the things that circle the idea create the shape.
I'm almost at the end of my question, so I'm just wondering if there's anything that's been rolling through your mind, or something you want to get across to people, or something you're already telling people, the friends, the family, reviewers, the literature community, about Ways of Paradise.
I mean, I think um, this is it has been a really particular experience to have been working with Peter and to have this book in progress and in process during the last, period of his life. Like I would say that in that way, the book has sat with me in this like incredibly profound way as I had been thinking about it as this book that is very much about the kind of loss of paradise or the sort of like how we relate to loss and kind of longing for something beautiful or transcendental. And so I think just on a personal level, this book sits in a really particular place with me because I think we were supposed to do an event in November or something like that, and it couldn't happen, and I don't know. And then he passed away, and I don't know. There was just something so tender about that somehow, like to be a person who's been holding somebody's book quite literally through these like um the last like couple of years of his life, I guess. So I just mostly hope that people find it and love it and feel it expand in them and like expand into the world the way that it has with me.
Yeah,
Um
absolutely. And I think finally, Gnosticism, it's full of lost texts. It has real ones. Gnostic texts have been rediscovered in the sands of Egypt. It has tropes, both ancient and sort of modern, where people are like, "Hey, I found this text. No, you can't see it, but an angel took it back up to heaven, or I lost it. But hey, I wrote down some of the stuff that was in it. Isn't this cool?" But this is a trope not just found in Gnosticism, not just found in religion. Really, it's it's a trope that has a hold on people's imaginations. And why do you think we want to find this dusty old book that will reveal everything? I think especially now when we have all of human knowledge in a tiny computer that fits in our pocket, right? I can read the last 6,000 years of recorded philosophy in writing. So why do I need a mysterious book, one more that will fix me and show me and have all the truths of the world. So can you tell us a little bit about your opinions on this trope and this yearning?
Isn't that kind of like the fantasy of paradise? Like if only we can find that one book. I mean, I think like my relationship to literature has in part come from, I think, a wild and I think slightly misguided belief that I remember developing in childhood that if I could only put the right words in the right order, I could like fix anything or I could conjure anything, you know, very spell oriented kind of kid. I don't know. And so I think like, yeah, I think your question gestures to creative practice, to like why we do anything in this world, you know, and also very much to the practice of translation, which is specifically about like bridging two things that will like might overlap or entwine, but they'll never merge. You know, that there is, and I don't think one should resist the sort of the gap or the difference between two texts, the original and the translation. And I think that reaching is kind of like the whole energy of human endeavor. It's what we it's what we're up to here. You know, this like reaching across the distance, whether it's, you know, in an attempt to love or in a desire to love or a desire to worship or a desire to like, yeah, impart this like experience of a text to another person in another language. You know, and I think like yeah, I think we get too caught up in wanting to find like the ultimate thing. Um, because it is kind of in the I think it is in that quivering in between that where the actual like magic and experience is. Right?
Yes, I agree. And I think that's the perfect point to wrap up. So everybody go down to the show notes. You will see the homepage for Saskia, which is just her name. So pretty straightforward. Go there and also buy this book. The link is going to also be in the show notes. And if you're wavering, even though this has been an amazing interview that has given us so much, if you're wavering on that purchase, I will have the link to the Paris review excerpt so you can check that out. Thanks so much. It's been really amazing having you.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Take care.